Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's start today's episode. The case of Demetrius Griffin Jr. Illinois, the sixth most populous state in the U.S., is home to rolling hills, vast farmlands, and a population of 12.85 million. While it is widely recognized for Chicago, a city that has served as the setting for major films like Home Alone, Ocean's 11, and The Dark Knight, Illinois also harbors numerous unsolved and lesser-known true crime cases. Demetrius Griffin Jr., described as respectful, kind, intelligent, and charismatic, seemed to have a bright future ahead of him. At just 15 years old, he had recently begun his freshman year at Steinmetz College Prep on Chicago's Northwest Side in September 2016. Following his middle school graduation. Teachers remembered him as a humorous student who enjoyed making others laugh, with a particular talent for math and science. He was also known for his love of dogs, his willingness to assist neighbors, and his interest in joining the school's swim team. A devoted churchgoer, Demetrius followed a structured routine. But on Friday, September 16, 2016, everything changed. Demetrius walked home from school alongside a female friend, eventually parting ways just a few blocks from his house. Known for his punctuality and strict adherence to his curfew, he had never stayed out late or gotten into trouble. But that night, he never made it home. His mother, Polly Sykes, later told reporters, "Once I realized he didn't come in on his curfew, I knew something was wrong." Although Polly's instincts told her something was amiss, she didn't know the full extent of the situation until later that night. At 1:25 a.m., firefighters responded to a fire in an alleyway on the 5500 block of West Cortez Street in Chicago's South Austin neighborhood. There, inside a large recycling bin, they discovered the charred remains of a teenage boy. He was soon identified as Demetrius Griffin Jr. His body had been burned beyond recognition, and authorities quickly ruled his death a homicide. The fire's thermal injury suggested he had been burned alive. Speaking to the media, his devastated mother emphasized, "He wasn't a gang member. He was a very respectful kid. He walked everybody in the neighborhood's dogs." Demetrius was not known to be affiliated with any gangs in the area, nor was he known to be involved with criminal activity. Due to a lack of evidence and information in the case, it's difficult to say what happens to Demetrius. Although many online sleuths have suggested he became a victim of the gangs who ruled the streets of Chicago. His family believed this may be the case too. It has been suggested that Demetrius's murder was a result of mistaken identity, that he was a victim of a gang initiation ritual where someone had to commit murder to prove their loyalty, or that he refused to be part of a gang and was killed in retaliation. It has also been theorized that Demetrius was the victim of a hate crime or a predator, or that it was a simple act of random violence. One Reddit user pointed out that Demetrius's murder was not the first of its kind in the city. In February 2007, two African American women were killed within days of one another after they were both strangled to death, stripped, dumped into bins, and set on fire. Teresa Byrne was just 21 years old and 8 months pregnant when she was murdered. Her body had been covered in accelerants before she was set ablaze. Just over a day later, 52-year-old Hazel Lewis was found dead again in a dumpster set on fire. They were both found near Washington Park. These are not the only victims of this kind of crime. Between 2012 and 2015, 5 charred bodies were found around the city. In November 2012, the remains of a man were located in a burning bin in an alleyway in the 3100 block of North Central Park Avenue. Then in 2013, 20-year-old Amy Martinez was found strangled in a burning dumpster on Chicago's Northwest Side. Additionally, that same year, a charred body was found in a vehicle in a garage in Irving Park. In June of 2015 in Brighton Park neighborhood, another body was found in a dumpster. That same month, another set of remains were discovered in a bin on the south side of Calumet Park. Although it has been speculated that the cases of Amy Martinez, Teresa Byrne, and Hazel Lewis are connected, many armchair detectives disagree that all 7 of the cases, 8, including Demetrius, were linked due to the fact they were carried out all over the city. Additionally, an article by ABC 7 News notes that a body was found inside a burned garage in the neighborhood of Pilsen in the days before the murder of Demetrius, but police do not believe it to be linked to his case. While it's been 5 years since Demetrius was murdered, his case is no closer to being solved now than it was in 2016. Authorities believe the killer probably burned themselves in the process of setting the 15-year-old alight. In the days following the horrific crime, a crowd of 150 people gathered to honor Demetrius at a vigil. His grieving mother pleaded with the community for help, saying, "Community, I need your help. They killed my baby out here in this alley. I need somebody. If you know something, please come forward. They took my life." In 2019, the reward for information leading to his killer was increased by $5,000, bringing the total to $15,000. A year later, AP News spoke with investigators who confirmed that while the case remained open, no suspects had been identified. Anyone with information about the murder of Demetrius Griffin Jr. is urged to contact the Chicago Police Department at 312-744-8261. Moving on to the next case. Diane Dello. Diane Dello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a quiet suburban city near Los Angeles. Her father served in the military, while her mother worked at a small clothing factory. When Diana was 19, she met a man named Kevin Green. She had been at a bar with a friend when a group of men began bothering them. One man became especially pushy, prompting Kevin to step in and make him leave. Grateful for his help, Diana offered to buy Kevin a drink. A few days later, they went on their first date, and their relationship progressed quickly. At the time, Kevin was still married, but he and his wife were in the middle of a divorce. During this period, Diana and Kevin moved in together, and she became pregnant. Once Kevin's divorce was finalized, the couple married that same day, excitedly preparing for the arrival of their daughter. The couple rented an apartment in a small complex in Tustin. Kevin was a Marine, working as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby base. Diana had previously worked alongside her mother at the clothing factory, but as her pregnancy advanced, she chose to stay home and prepare for their baby's arrival. By September 1979, Diana was 9.5 months pregnant and expected to go into labor at any moment. On the evening of September 30th, after watching a movie together, Diana and Kevin got into an argument. The pressure of becoming parents had been affecting both of them, leading to frequent fights. To cool off and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to take a drive to a nearby fast food restaurant. About 40 minutes later, the local police department received a disturbing call. It was Kevin. He reported that someone had shot his wife and urgently requested an ambulance. At the time, a patrol car was nearby, allowing officers to arrive at the scene quickly. When they entered the apartment, they discovered Diana lying on the bed in the bedroom, covered in blood. At first glance, her injuries appeared to resemble a gunshot wound, and blood was splattered across the bedroom wall. Despite her condition, Diana was still breathing, prompting the officers to administer first aid while waiting for the ambulance. Uncertain about the situation, they also asked Kevin to leave the room. When the paramedics arrived, they carefully transferred Diana into the ambulance. Initially, they too believed she had been shot but soon realized the injury was caused by blunt force trauma rather than a gunshot. Although Kevin wanted to accompany his wife to the hospital, the police refused. They needed to take his statement and were still considering every possibility, including the chance that he was involved in the attack. Kevin appeared to be in shock, struggling to process the officers' questions. When he tried to climb into the ambulance, they had to stop him. As the ambulance drove away, he began to collect himself and shared his account of the evening with the police. He explained that after arguing with Diana, he decided to drive to a fast food restaurant to get burgers and clear his mind. Upon leaving the apartment, he realized he had forgotten his keys inside but chose not to go back for them. Instead, he shut the door and went straight to his car. Kevin also mentioned that as he was leaving the complex, he noticed a van parked nearby with its back door open. An African-American man was walking back and forth to the vehicle, which struck him as odd given that it was around 2 a.m. When Kevin arrived at his usual fast food spot, the line was too long, so he drove to another location of the same chain a few miles away. After buying some burgers, he returned home, a trip that took approximately 40 minutes. When Kevin arrived at the front door, he found it wide open. Alarmed, he rushed inside and heard an unusual sound, something resembling snoring. In the bedroom, he discovered Diana covered in blood and struggling to breathe, prompting him to call the police immediately. However, parts of Kevin's story raised suspicion. For instance, his decision to go out for burgers in the middle of the night seemed unusual. Additionally, the trip had taken him approximately 40 minutes, longer than expected, given that the nearby fast food restaurants were close to his apartment. Despite these concerns, the officers examined the fast food bag and found the food still warm. The receipt confirmed the restaurant's location and the time of purchase, aligning with Kevin's account. With this evidence, the police allowed him to go to the hospital, but only after collecting a blood sample. Although DNA analysis wasn't available at the time, investigators could still compare Kevin's blood type with the traces found at the crime scene. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors confirmed that her head wound was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it appeared that the attacker had used a small but heavy object, possibly a piece of wood, to deliver multiple blows. Shortly after being admitted, Diana fell into a coma. For several hours, doctors fought to save both her and her unborn child. Although they were able to stabilize her condition, she required surgery to address her injuries. At the same time, investigators asked medical professionals to determine whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. This request was not only part of standard procedure but also driven by the way Diana had been positioned when officers found her. The examination soon confirmed their suspicions. Traces of semen were discovered on her body. However, the investigation faced complications. Kevin had already told detectives that he and Diana had been intimate just a few hours before their argument, and with DNA analysis unavailable at the time, there was no way to confirm whether the evidence came from him or someone else. Despite having a biological sample from the perpetrator, investigators were limited in what they could do without advanced DNA analysis. Kevin and Diana's relatives stayed at the hospital through the night, anxiously hoping both Diana and her baby would survive. However, by morning, an unexpected complication arose. One of the monitors detected a sudden decline in the baby's condition. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the baby girl could not be saved. Following the baby's death, surgeons immediately operated on Diana, successfully stabilizing her condition. Although she remained in a coma, her chances of survival had significantly improved. However, doctors warned that the severity of her injuries made a full return to normal life unlikely. Meanwhile, detectives intensified their efforts to identify the person responsible for the attack. With the loss of the baby, the case was reclassified as a homicide, prompting the local police department to dedicate all available resources to the investigation. Although Kevin had provided an alibi, detectives remained cautious and did not rule him out as a suspect. His story raised numerous questions. He had an argument with his wife just hours before the attack, left the front door unlocked, and was absent for an extended period for a supposed quick trip to the fast food joint. His claim of seeing a suspicious man near the house in the middle of the night also seemed too convenient, but there was no evidence against Kevin. Moreover, the police already had another suspect. About a year before these events, crimes with a similar modus operandi had started happening in Tustin and its surrounding areas. In December 1978, an unknown perpetrator broke into the apartment of a 17-year-old girl, struck her with a piece of wood, and assaulted her, resulting in her death. 4 months later, the same happened to a 21-year-old woman. Someone broke into her home and struck her with a piece of wood. She didn't survive either. In July 1979, the unknown perpetrator entered another woman's apartment and did the same to her, but she managed to survive. However, the victim spent several weeks in a coma due to her injuries, and her subsequent testimony didn't bring detectives closer to finding the attacker. In September 1979, Less than a month before Diana's attack, the same happened to a 31-year-old woman, who died the next day. Her son provided investigators with a description of the assailant, but the man still couldn't be identified. All these crimes shared striking similarities, just like the attack on Diana. Police were almost certain that they were dealing with a serial killer, and all their efforts were focused on catching this individual. He had already got a nickname, the Bedroom Basher. Considering that the perpetrator was committing his crimes with short intervals and operating in a relatively small suburban area of Los Angeles, detectives believed that he could strike again very soon. They decided to reach out to the public through the media and warn all women who lived alone, especially those in lower-floor apartments, as they were apparently the preferred targets of the suspected serial killer. This sparked a wave of panic. Women began clearing store shelves of any means of protection, signing up for self-defense courses and staying with friends and relatives, trying to safeguard themselves from the dangerous criminal. Police also began patrolling the streets at nightfall. Detectives interviewed anyone who could have had any connection to these crimes, and soon they received their first leads. Several neighbors of the victims reported seeing a suspicious white man with dark, thick hair near their houses. Although this description was quite superficial, police located several matching men, investigated them, but it led nowhere. A week after Diana's attack, doctors informed her loved ones that she had finally regained consciousness. But there was a serious problem. Diana couldn't speak or remember anything, and according to the doctors, her brain needed some time to recover, functioning at the level of a 6-year-old child. Around the same time, another attack happened in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, struck her several times with a piece of wood, and sexually assaulted her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police once again failed to catch the culprit. Diana spent several more days in the hospital, and her mind began to gradually return to normal. However, she had almost completely lost her memory and still couldn't recall even her parents. Doctors said her memory might eventually return, but warned her family not to recount anything to her and to allow her to remember everything on her own. Once her life-threatening condition passed, Diana was discharged from the hospital, and her family took her home. Since Kevin needed to work on the military base to pay the bills, they moved in with Diana's parents, who could care for her around the clock. 2 weeks later, another tragic attack occurred in the city with a similar modus operandi, and this time, the unknown assailant killed a 17-year-old girl. After being discharged from the hospital, Diana started attending physiotherapy, and her condition gradually improved. She still couldn't speak or remember what happened to her, but everything suddenly changed 6 weeks after the attack. During a physiotherapy session, the therapist brought up the attack and asked if Diana still couldn't remember who did it to her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly nodded and pointed to her wedding ring. When Diana's mother came to pick her up, the doctor told her about this, and the mother asked her daughter, "Was it Kevin who attacked you?" And Diana nodded. Right after that, her mother took her to the police station, where she spoke with the lead detective. He asked Diana a few more questions, and she confirmed that she suddenly remembered the moment of the attack, and the perpetrator was none other than her husband. For the detective, this completely changed the course of the case. He and his team were almost certain that Diana was attacked by the same serial criminal responsible for the other similar attacks. But now, the detective faced several questions. Could Kevin be the bedroom basher? He lived in the same area where the attacks happened and even matched the description provided. Basher were almost identical each single time. It wouldn't have been difficult. The detective thought that if he arrested Kevin now, his involvement in other crimes might never be proven, and Kevin himself could flee as soon as he realized he was caught. So, he made a difficult decision. He asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana still remembered nothing and to return home to Kevin. This was obviously a huge challenge for both of them, but they agreed nonetheless. Investigators put Kevin under surveillance and closely monitored all his movements, hoping to eventually link him to other attacks. Police spoke with Kevin's friend to learn more about the suspect, and they quickly found out something interesting. Those who knew him well said that his relationship with Diana was quite tense. The couple argued frequently, a fact also confirmed by neighbors who often heard their screams. According to friends, Kevin regularly complained to them that Diana refused to be intimate with him in the final months of her pregnancy. Yet, Kevin had described his relationship with Diana to detectives as nearly perfect. But besides that, detectives couldn't gather any additional useful information. Kevin behaved quite normally. He went to work and came back home without lingering anywhere else and didn't raise any suspicions. The police also received results from the lab, revealing an interesting discovery. Besides the attacker's semen, they found skin particles with blood under Diana's nails. Specialists matched the blood type of the attacker to Kevin's blood sample, and it matched. It meant that Kevin had the same blood type as the person who attacked Diana. Based on this information, detectives came up with the most likely version of what had happened on that fateful night. Kevin indeed bought burgers at a fast food joint a few miles from home. The time on the receipt and cashier's words confirmed his presence, so detectives believed he could have attacked Diana before leaving home, then quickly went to the fast food restaurant to create an alibi, explaining the extended 40-minute trip. Regarding motive, detectives theorized that Diana's refusal to engage in intimacy served as the trigger. Despite Kevin's claim that they had had sex hours before the incident, he frequently complained to friends attack, and Kevin was indeed the one who assaulted her. During the conversation, her mother said they could no longer pretend and live under the same roof as Kevin. After that, detectives decided to arrest him and proceed with legal action. Kevin was taken into custody while he was at a store to avoid risking Diana's family, and conducting the arrest at their home. Kevin refused to admit guilt, insisting that everything happened exactly as he had told them. Preparation for the trial took 10 months. During this time, Diana's physical condition gradually improved. She could speak again, although not without difficulty. Diana was also examined by several doctors, who came to a unanimous conclusion that her brain had sufficiently recovered and she was a reliable witness. Diana testified in court, confirming that the person who attacked her that night was indeed her husband. Kevin's defense insisted on his innocence, trying to use the fast food alibi, but it wasn't enough against the victim's testimony. In November 1980, Kevin was found guilty of killing his child and assaulting his wife. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Regarding Kevin's possible involvement in other murders and assaults, detectives noticed something interesting. Before Kevin's arrest, 2 more similar crimes occurred in their county, but both victims survived. They still hadn't been able to identify the attacker, so his identity remained unknown. But after Kevin's arrest, the attack suddenly stopped. Before that, the bedroom basher committed his crimes quite frequently, sometimes with only a few weeks between them. But once Kevin was arrested, there were no more similar crimes at all. Right after the sentencing, Diana filed for divorce, and Kevin didn't try to object it. Since then, Diana continued to work on her recovery, but it was quite challenging considering the injuries she sustained. Her brain almost returned to normal, but some problems remained with her forever. She partially lost her hearing and vision and still struggled to speak. As for Kevin, he continued to insist on his innocence for years. His time in prison wasn't easy. Other inmates repeatedly attacked him for killing a child, and Kevin ended up in the hospital multiple times. When he had the opportunity to apply for parole, the commission denied it, and over the following years, he received 3 more denials. The main reason for these decisions was that Kevin had never admitted his guilt, which was seen as a lack of remorse. When DNA analysis became widely utilized in forensics, Kevin attempted to request analysis of the existing samples and comparison with his DNA, but this request was rejected due to the fact that he didn't have enough money to pay for the analysis. This went on until 1996, when the police department reopened the investigation into a series of attacks allegedly committed by the bedroom basher. Throughout this time, semen samples taken from the victims' bodies were stored in the laboratory. Now, detectives had the opportunity not only to determine if one person was behind all these crimes, but also possibly to identify them. Kevin remained the prime suspect, but when experts obtained the DNA profile of the perpetrator and added it to the database, there was an unexpected twist. All these samples matched another man named Gerald Parker. Parker was arrested in the same year as Kevin. He assaulted a 13-year-old girl in Tustin and was caught shortly after. At the time, detectives did not link this crime to the series of attacks because they had a different pattern. While the bedroom basher targeted victims late at night in their apartments, Parker abducted the girl on the street. Since then, he had been serving his sentence in prison and was set to be released in just a few days. After investigators obtained DNA matches for Parker in all the unsolved cases, they also remembered the attack on Diana. Although this crime was considered solved, detectives still considered its connection to the other similar cases highly likely. Now, they understood that Kevin definitely wasn't the serial killer, leaving them with just one question: did he really attack his wife? Interestingly, during those years, Parker served at the same military base as Kevin and also owned a dark-colored van. As we recall, on the very first day, Kevin told the police that he saw an African-American man in front of their house walking near a dark van. This made detectives wonder, what if Parker was behind the attack on Diana? The local prosecutor visited Kevin in prison and informed him of the progress in the investigation of the bedroom basher murder series. He then asked Kevin to provide a direct sample of his DNA for analysis. Kevin, who had been trying to do this for years, immediately agreed. While experts conducted the analysis, detectives went to see Parker in prison. At that point, they hadn't yet charged him with the series of attacks because they needed time to prepare such a complex case. Nevertheless, the police decided to talk to the suspect, hoping he might give them a confession. Parker began to deny his involvement in the series of crimes, so detectives shifted the conversation to the attack on Diana. Before questioning him, they reviewed Parker's case and found something interesting. After his arrest for assaulting the girl, he told the police that military service was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Detectives decided to use this to their advantage and questioned how he could let another soldier take the blame for his crime. They continued pressing Parker, appealing to his loyalty to the military, until he suddenly said that another person was indeed serving time for the murder he committed. He continued, admitting that on that night, he did indeed drive to Kevin's house in his van. His plan was to roam the neighborhood, peering into ground floor windows, as he had done many times before, looking for his next victim. But this time, he heard screams from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and a man came out onto the street. Parker noticed that he didn't lock the door, waited for a few minutes, then entered the apartment and assaulted Diana. He also said that he didn't know her husband since they had different duties on the military base. Parker also confessed to the other crimes, admitting to 6 murders and 3 non-lethal attacks. After the police obtained confessions, DNA results proved Parker's involvement and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor promised to overturn his sentence as soon as possible, and a few days later, Kevin walked free after spending 16 years behind bars. The twist in this case caused a widespread outcry. It wasn't just because an innocent man spent nearly half his life for someone else's crime, but also because it took so long for the police to establish the real killer's identity. However, that wasn't the last twist in this case. When Kevin was released, the state of California agreed to pay him $10,000, which was a relatively small amount of money even for those times. Several years later, he got an additional compensation of $100 for each day spent in prison, totaling $620,000, but the story didn't end there. Despite Kevin's full exoneration, Diana refused to believe in his innocence. Up until that point, she had claimed Kevin was the only one who attacked her. However, after biological material from her body matched Parker's DNA, she came up with a new version. Diana claimed that on that night, Kevin attacked and assaulted her before leaving, and then Parker entered the apartment and did the same to her. Parker himself repeatedly stated that when he entered the apartment, the woman was simply lying on the bed, without any visible injuries or signs of distress. He also claimed that he was the one who struck her on the head. Diana's family proposed another theory, suggesting that Kevin might have asked Parker to commit the crime, which is why he left the house that night, leaving the door open. But Parker continued to insist that he didn't know Kevin. There were numerous people on the military base, many of whom didn't know each other personally. Besides, such a version would imply that Kevin should have known Parker was the serial killer to ask him something like that, which he vehemently denied. Kevin also denied any connection with Parker, insisting he would never harm Diana, let alone their unborn daughter. He maintained that he left the door unlocked simply because he didn't want to return for the keys right after the argument with his wife. He also added that he still blames himself from the coma. Doctors warned all her relatives not to tell her of what from the coma. Doctors warned all her relatives not to tell her of what had happened. The reason was that at the time, her brain could accept any information as true, and she would believe such memories to be accurate and real. Even 16 years after the incident, when Kevin was finally released, Diana continued to face significant challenges. One notable difficulty was her struggle to process fast speech, a clear indication that the trauma had caused lasting damage to her brain. It is possible that the effects of this trauma played a role in her persistent belief that Kevin was responsible for the attack. As for Parker, he was sentenced to death in 1999, but the execution has never been carried out. After spending years on death row, his sentence was effectively paused when California implemented a moratorium on capital punishment. As a result, Parker remains incarcerated to this day, serving his sentence behind bars. Moving on to the next case. Diane Hank. On January 6, 1954, 16-year-old Diane Hank called her 23-year-old friend Sherry to let her know she had a belated Christmas gift for Sherry's husband and asked if she could bring it over. Sherry happily agreed and invited Diane to stay for dinner, but asked her to get permission from her mother first. After receiving approval, Diane set off for her friend's house. Sherry Fong, whose real name was Marjorie Lovell Fong, and her husband Wei Him Fong, known as Wayne, had first met Diane 3 years earlier in 1951. At the time, they had recently moved to Portland, Oregon, and were searching for a babysitter for their child. The couple quickly grew close to Diane, with Sherry developing a particularly strong bond with her. They frequently exchanged expensive gifts, borrowed each other's clothing, and Diane even stayed overnight on occasion. At just 15 years old, Diane had given birth to her own daughter, Catherine, and often brought her along, caring for both children simultaneously. When Diane arrived at the Fong's home, she found another couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jean Smalley, already there enjoying drinks with Sherry and Wayne. The Smalleys were familiar with Diane and greeted her warmly, but they decided to leave before dinner, opting not to stay with the trio. Mrs. Smalley later recalled that Diane had consumed 2 martinis while they were still there and was acting playfully by the time they departed. Reports suggest that Diane may have had as many as 5 martinis that evening. 2 people spoke to her on the phone later that night. One of them, a friend of the 16-year-old, later mentioned that Diane's speech was slurred. According to this friend, Diane had told her they were having a party, planned to have dinner, and that she was feeling high. The second person to call Diane that night was her mother. Around 9:30 p.m., they spoke briefly, and Diane mentioned that Sherry had given her some vitamin capsules. Concerned, Mrs. Hank told her daughter to return them, to which Diane agreed but hesitated, saying, *, "You know, it would be kind of hard. You know how Sherry is. *. They spoke again sometime after 10 p.m., during which Diane mentioned that her hair was up in pin curls and that she'd be home soon. However, about an hour later, she called once more, explaining that Wayne had gone out and hadn't come back yet, leaving her without a way to get home. Given the late hour, she and her mother agreed that it would be best for her to stay the night with the Fongs. After that final call, Diane disappeared. The next morning, Mrs. Hank contacted Sherry, who claimed that Diane had left for school on the bus at 8 a.m. According to Sherry, they had gone to bed around 11:30 p.m. the previous night and slept in late. She had offered Diane a ride, but the teenager declined, opting to take the bus instead. However, Diane never arrived at school and never returned home. In fact, there was no sign of her anywhere. Police quickly launched an investigation, with the Fongs becoming the primary suspects. Not only were they the last people to see Diane alive, but their mixed-race marriage was considered unusual at the time, which fueled local suspicion. Additionally, Rumors circulated that Wayne had ties to organized crime, and 6 years earlier, he had pleaded guilty to a narcotics charge. Investigators believe the couple may have played a role in Diane's disappearance, and racial biases, gossip, and moral judgments further complicated the case. Some people lost interest when they found out that Diane had a daughter outside of wedlock. Others simply held racist beliefs about Wayne Fong and perpetuated unsubstantiated rumors. That said, from the outside, the situation was odd even for 1954. Why was Sherry, a 23-year-old woman, so close to a 16-year-old schoolgirl? Why did the couple allow the teenager to stay the night? Why did they lavish her with pricey gifts? By today's standards, their actions appear very predatory. Following Diane's disappearance, Sherry placed a personal ad in the local paper which read, "Diane, please contact me. Regardless of your present circumstances or anything you may have done, I'll help you all I can. Sherry." An undercover officer later stated their belief that the thongs were being thrown to the walls, that the team investigating the case were under pressure to solve it and close it, and they were looking for anyone they could pin the blame on. Several of the 16-year-old's classmates came forward after she went missing. One of them told the authorities that they'd seen her downtown on the day of her disappearance. Another reported bumping into her at a department store a few weeks later. However, none of the sightings could be verified. Another suspect in the case was Kenneth Martin, Diane's boyfriend and Catherine's father. Reportedly, he told the 16-year-old that he would kill her if he ever saw her with another boy. 16-year-old that he would kill her if he ever saw her with another boy. Understandably, Diane found this statement incredibly distressing. However, the evidence of his threats comes only from Sherry, who claims Diane told her this. She also stated the teenager was so distraught that she was suicidal. She said Diane once told her, "If he stands me up again, I'll kill myself." There were also allegations that Sherry told a bartender that the teenager had taken her own life, and that she had said to the police that Diane had contributed perhaps 75% to her own death. On February 26, Diane's body was found on a steep hill on the south side of Everclark County, Washington. She was wrapped in 2 blankets and a sheet and tied with rope. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn when she went round to the fogs. There were Kirby grips in her hair which had been shaped into curls and held in place with the grips, and she was not wearing stockings or her shoes. Almost all of Diane's clothing looked intact except for her bra, which was only partially fastened and had been moved up over her breasts. It was determined that she had died from barbiturate poisoning or from the mixing of barbiturates and alcohol. The teenager had never been prescribed barbiturates. In the pocket of Diane's jumper, investigators found a small plastic medicine bottle. It was about 2/3 full. The capsules contained rubermin, commonly known as vitamin B12, and a multivitamin. Sherry had already told the police that the pills the 16-year-old had told her mother about were vitamins. So this appeared to line up. Forensics showed that black straight coarse hair was found on the inner surface of the blanket wrapped around Diane's body. Further examination of the strands showed that they belonged to someone of Asian ancestry. It was similar to a sample taken from Wayne Fong and another defendant who was later tried in court, Quang Tin Yi. Forensics also revealed that on the outer blankets and on the back of Diane's underwear, there was a black sooty material similar to a substance found in the Fong's basement. Investigators later theorized the teenager was dragged across the basement floor, which is how she ended up with the soot on the back of her body. Adding to this was that Sherry reportedly told a married couple that her life was so fantastic, "I even found a body in my basement," or "there was a body in my basement." When they asked her to expand on this, she told them it will be in all the newspapers. A spot of blood was also found in the Fong's car, but it could not be determined whether it was human or not. Notably, 5 days after Diane went missing, Sherry reportedly had the car, including its trunk, washed and cleaned. The circumstantial evidence against the Fongs was compelling, and it seemed like new details were constantly coming to light with the discovery of Diane's body. A Filipino man who had once been employed by Wayne Fong, Pio Rigo, claimed Wayne had talked to him about a dead body in January of 1954, told him the body was in the car and, quote, "He tell me to come help him." Reportedly, Wayne later told Rago that he would kill him if he didn't keep his mouth shut. Soon Sherry was brought in for questioning. She was interrogated for hours without breaks and over the course of 16 hours provided the police with no useful information. Authorities used several strategies to attempt to get a confession, including having one of her friends question her involvement, but Sherry denied having anything to do with Diane's death. The police believed the Fong had given the teenager barbiturates that killed her, but neither half of the couple would confess. Despite this, a grand jury indicted both Sherry and Wayne as well as a third person, Wang Ting-yi, who spent much of his time at the Fong's house and is believed to have been a business associate of Wayne's. At their first trial, Wayne and Sherry were found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by gas chamber. However, a judge overturned the verdict, asserting that the prosecution failed to provide anything more than circumstantial evidence. In subsequent trials, it was revealed that the Fongs were heavily involved in the Portland drug scene and that Wayne in particular was an important part of a criminal organization. Sherry was tried a second time, but the case ended in a mistrial. During her third trial, she was convicted, but the verdict was later overturned. She was tried a fourth time and ultimately acquitted. At some point between her third and fourth trials, she allegedly confided in an undercover police informant, claiming that a Chinese syndicate wanted Diane dead for talking too much. She reportedly offered the syndicate $125,000 to spare the teenager's life. Wayne also managed to avoid consequences in Diane's case, but in 1958, he was arrested and charged with dealing heroin. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, though he was paroled after serving 12. Following his release, he quickly returned to Portland and resumed his criminal activities. In 1973, he was convicted of possessing heroin and cocaine. 3 years later, in 1976, he died in prison after an accidental fall in the shower. After Wayne's imprisonment, Sherry Fong largely faded from public view. Though she had been attending university at the time of Diane's disappearance, she never completed her studies. In 1987, she accepted probation for tampering with drug records. She passed away later that year at the age of 56. Diane's disappearance remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. The murder of Kaylee Sawyer. In July 2016, a man carried out a 3-day crime spree across Oregon and California, leaving a lasting impact on his victims and their families. The violence began in the early hours of July 24th, when 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer from Bend, Oregon, was abducted and killed. An autopsy later confirmed that she died from blunt force trauma and had fought for her life. The next day, on July 25th, 19-year-old Andrea Elizabeth Mace was carjacked and kidnapped at gunpoint in Salem, Oregon. The attacker falsely claimed to be a police officer and even showed her news reports about Kaylee Sawyer's murder. Forcing Andrea to accompany him to California, the perpetrator stopped at a hotel in Cottage Grove, Oregon, along the way. Inside the hotel room, he handcuffed her, made her take sleeping pills, and behaved in a way that led her to fear she would be assaulted. However, after receiving a phone call and worrying that law enforcement was closing in on him, he abruptly left the hotel and resumed the journey toward California. At some point during the drive, he attempted to swap vehicles to evade capture, stopping at 2 separate rest areas in search of another car to steal. In the early hours of July 26th, the perpetrator stopped at a motel in Yreka, California, where he noticed an elderly man standing near his vehicle. He parked, took Andrea by the hand, and approached the man. With his gun in plain sight, he demanded the vehicle. When the man refused to comply, the attacker shot him in the abdomen. Andrea, desperate for escape, begged him to let her go. Instead of releasing her, he tightened his grip on her hand and forced her to flee with him on foot to a nearby gas station. There, he came across his next victims, 2 young men and their elderly grandmother sitting inside a car. Threatening them with his gun, he climbed into the vehicle with Andrea and ordered them to drive. As they traveled, he admitted to his hostages that he had an overwhelming urge to take lives, revealing that he had already killed a young woman in Bend and shot a man in Yreka. He eventually dropped his 3 California victims on the side of the road, again threatening to take their lives, and continued driving southbound with Andrea. Soon after, California law enforcement caught up with the perpetrator and arrested him. After he called 911 and said he was wanted for slaying, 34-year-old Edwin Enoch Lara was a campus safety officer at Central Oregon Community College and a resident of Bend, Oregon. On November 16, 2016, a federal grand jury returned a 4-count indictment, charging Lara with 1 count each of kidnapping and carjacking, and 2 counts of using, carrying and brandishing a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. In January 2018, prior to his sentencing, Lara pleaded guilty to the kidnapping and carjacking charges. He was then sentenced to life in federal prison. In April 2019, Lara received a second life sentence for terrorizing Andrea when he carjacked and abducted her. She briefly addressed Lara in court. "You thought you stole my life from me, but I am not a victim. I am a survivor. I am a warrior. I am stronger than I have ever been, and you are going to rot where you belong." Billy J. Williams, U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon, said Edwin Lara is a ruthless perpetrator who will rightfully spend the rest of his life in prison. There is simply no place in civil society for this type of horrific violence. I sincerely hope Lara's 2 life sentences will bring some measure of comfort to his victims and their families. Their courage and perseverance throughout Lara's lengthy state and federal cases are an inspiration to the entire law enforcement community. In July 2020, Central Oregon Community College has agreed to pay $2 million to the family of Kaylee, as he was on duty at the college. The family filed a federal lawsuit against the college in July 2017, arguing that Kaylee accepted a ride from Lara, believing he was a police officer she could trust. Instead, she became trapped in a patrol car equipped with a cage and doors that would not open from the inside. Julie Van Cleef, Kaylee's mother, said the family plans to use part of the settlement to continue KK's Readers, a program that provides books for kids in Head Start and early education programs. She expressed that she could finally lay her daughter to rest in peace, knowing that everyone responsible for the tragic crime had been held accountable. Now, she could grieve for Kaylee as her daughter, rather than as the victim of a brutal slaying. In the wake of Kaylee's death, the state enacted Kaylee's Law, legislation designed to safeguard students and the public by clearly defining the responsibilities of campus safety officers. Wearing an orange-striped jail uniform, Lara spoke briefly, saying he was sorry for what had happened. He claimed he wished he could have prevented it but insisted he did not understand how it occurred, stating, "I was never this kind of guy." Moving on to the next case. Melanin Rodriguez. On December 2, 2013, in Mallorca, 15-year-old Melanin Rodriguez woke up at 6 a.m. and went about her usual morning routine. She got dressed, had breakfast, and headed off to school. At the end of the day, she boarded a bus to go home, only to realize she had forgotten her keys inside the house. With her father at work and her brother out, she decided to get off the bus and called her boyfriend, 17-year-old Daniel, to ask if she could come over for lunch. Daniel's parents approved, and Melanin left a voicemail for her father to let him know where she would be. She then set off for Daniel's house on her skateboard, a journey of about 2.5 miles. Numerous witnesses later reported seeing her traveling along the cycle path that day. CCTV footage captured her at 3:51 p.m., skating toward the village of Sunfarer. However, just 300 meters ahead of her, at a petrol station where another CCTV camera was positioned along her route, Melanin never appeared. Melanin disappeared along the stretch of the cycle path between the 2 CCTV cameras. When she failed to arrive at Daniel's house, both he and his parents grew increasingly worried. Before long, a missing persons report was filed. However, much like in the cases of Manuela and Virginia, investigators dismissed the concerns of Melanin's loved ones. They assumed she had run away and refused to begin searching for her until 48 hours had passed. Once authorities finally launched an investigation, they discovered that Melanin's mobile phone had run out of battery, making it impossible to track her location. Reviewing footage from the petrol station CCTV, which she should have passed but never did, they noticed something even more unsettling. Melanin's younger brother, Bruno, had been cycling nearby at the same time. The two should have crossed paths, riding in opposite directions, yet Bruno never saw her. In the weeks that followed, search teams, including mountain rescue specialists, civil guard agents, local police, and firefighters, scoured the surrounding wooded areas in hopes of finding Melanin. Nearby coastal cliffs were checked and divers took to the lakes at a neighboring golf course. No sign of the 15-year-old was discovered. Law enforcement theories about what became of Marlon seemed to split into two camps. The camp that thinks she ran away from home and the camp that believes she met with foul play. By all accounts, Marlon had previously lived a very troubled life. Originally from Argentina, she, her brother, and her parents relocated to Mallorca when Marlon was 5. She was described as outgoing and independent, and was a keen rock music enthusiast who hoped to go to art school and dreamed of one day opening her own tattoo studio. However, her family life was heavily troubled. When her parents divorced in February 2006, just 3 years after the move to Spain, Marlon and Bruno began living with their father. Marlon's relationship with her mother was said to be difficult, but she was no better off with her father, who was sometimes physically abusive. At some points, Marlon began experimenting with drugs. When she was just 13, her father, Alfonso, discovered her undressed in bed with a boy, and she was horrifically beaten by him to the point that she had to be hospitalized. Several years later, though, she stopped using drugs and began to take care of herself, eventually meeting Daniel, an aspiring musician whom she began dating. Daniel told investigators that in the days before her disappearance, Marlon had been frequently seen crying and had made an appointment with the school counselor the following day. Her friends backed up these statements. This led to some speculation that she was so troubled, she decided to leave everything behind. Investigators who believed she met with foul play, however, drew this conclusion from information which indicated that her father was in business with people who were parts of organized crime. The son of a drug trafficker he knew offered $500 in exchange for the whereabouts of Marlon, but this failed to produce any leads. There are some allegations online that the man who offered the reward began to distance himself from Alfonso afterwards. Her mother, Natalia, was on a trip to Thailand at the time of her daughter's disappearance. Over the years, Melanin's mother has repeatedly expressed her frustration and disappointment with the civil guard for failing to uncover any answers in the case. She has stated that while her daughter was strong-willed, she was also mature, leading her to believe that Melanin was taken by someone she knew. Decades have passed since her disappearance, yet no trace of Melanin Rodriguez has ever been found. At the time she went missing, 15-year-old Melanin was wearing red trainers, ripped jeans, a plaid shirt over a t-shirt, and a denim jacket. She stood at 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed approximately 121 pounds. Melanin is described as having long, curly brown hair and brown eyes. If you have any information regarding her disappearance, please contact the local missing persons group at 3464-265-0775. Moving on to the next case. The disappearance and murder of Patrice Endres. Patrice Endres was a 38-year-old woman from Cumming, Georgia, who lived with her husband, Rob, and her 15-year-old son, Pistol. She and Rob met when she was 30 and he was 50. Rob often said that marrying Patrice made him the happiest man in the world. She owned a hair salon where she specialized in cutting and dyeing hair. Many of her clients would stay and chat with her long after their appointments. Beloved by her community, Patrice had a deep passion for hairstyling and making people feel their best. She dedicated herself to building her salon into a thriving business, attracting many loyal customers who continued to return. She was also a devoted mother, actively involved in Pistol's life, attending all of his meets and games. Above all, she wanted to spread happiness to those around her. On the morning of April 15, 2004, Patrice woke Pistol up in her usual way, by running on a treadmill. That morning, they had a brief argument because Pistol was in a rush to get to school. After dropping him off at his high school, she headed to work. A few hours later, while Pistol was in biology class, he was called to the office, where he was asked if he could get in touch with his mother. Pistol tried calling Patrice 3 times, but she didn't answer, a red flag since she always returned missed calls right away. Unbeknownst to him, one of Patrice's clients had already reported her missing after arriving at the salon and finding her gone. When Sheriff Ron Freeman arrived at the salon and found no trace of Patrice, he immediately suspected something was wrong. He also noticed that the cash register was open and some money was missing. Patrice's purse was still on the counter, and her lunch remained untouched in the microwave. Aside from these details, everything else in the salon appeared normal, leaving everyone confused about her sudden disappearance. However, one unusual thing stood out. Her car was not parked in its usual spot on the left side of the salon. Instead, it was positioned directly in front of the building that day. With little evidence to guide them, investigators launched an immediate search. Helicopters scanned the area from above while search teams combed the woods behind the salon. When no sign of Patrice was found, authorities turned to reconstructing a timeline of her last known movements. At 8:50 a.m., her first client, Pam Shepard, arrived for her appointment. Pam later told police that Patrice seemed distracted and unusually inattentive during their session. At 11:05 a.m., Pam leaves the salon and Patrice is still there. 5 minutes later, at 11:10 a.m., Paul Cantor arrives for his haircut. He left the salon at 11:27 a.m. He received a phone call as he was leaving. That is how police knew what the time was. Then at 11:35 a.m., a customer calls Patrice. The customer told police that Patrice was sort of short on the phone, which was unusual. The call lasts for about 2 minutes until 11:37 a.m. The next call that came in was 11:50 a.m., and it goes unanswered. The conclusion that can be made is that something happened to Patrice in that 13 minutes. After having asked Pistol to try and get into contact with his mom to no avail, the police took him to Patrice's hair salon. Only then did they tell him that she was missing. Pistol was sure she would come back. She couldn't just be gone. Rob also later arrived at a hair salon. He was then informed that he would have to go to a station for some questioning. Rob claims since he has a degree in criminology, he wasn't surprised by this. He knew he would have to be questioned since he was Patrice's husband, and in some missing persons cases, it turns out that his spouse was responsible for the disappearance. It did not take long for the police to receive a possible lead. 2 eyewitnesses came forward and they both saw pretty much the same thing. Also important to note, the 2 witnesses did not know each other at all. At 11:45 a.m., Tammy Fincher noticed that Patrice's car was parked in front of the store while she drove past the hair salon. She also noticed a Chevy Lumina parked right next to it. The Chevy Lumina did have a Georgia license plate according to her. The second witness had also drove past the hair salon basically at the same time as Tammy, saw the same, but he believed it is a Ford Taurus or possibly a Malibu. Tammy Fincher saw 2 women standing in front of the car, one of them being really tall. The second witness, however, believes that a tall woman is actually a man with long hair. Since these 2 witnesses are basically the same thing and they are totally independent of each other, the police saw them as being credible. After searching through the woods for Patrice for hours, young Pistol went back home. The next day he learned that Rob changed the locks of the house. Rob didn't allow Pistol to come back in at all. Bristol was 8 years old when Rob and Patrice got married on the March 2nd, 1997. Rob and Pistol never liked each other. Pistol remembers that in the first year, Rob was really nice and tried to be a stepfather. It didn't last long, however, and Rob totally changed his attitude towards Pistol. Rob would walk past his room and just say really crude stuff. This went on for years. Many of Patrice's friends described Rob as being very jealous. Rob was especially jealous when Pistol got attention from Patrice. He wanted her all to himself. In the Unsolved Mysteries episode of Patrice's case, Pistol said that she talked about divorcing Rob a couple of weeks before her disappearance. Rob, on the other hand, denied this and said things were going very well from his point of view. After Rob changed the locks and Pistol couldn't get in, he had to go live with his father on a farm. As you can imagine, this was a really hard time in Pistol's life. His mom was gone, his stepdad kicked him out, and his father had crippling depression. As time went on, Bristol got more and more anxious about Patrice still being gone. Initially, He believed that she maybe went elsewhere to start a new life for them, away from Rob, and that she would be coming to pick him up anytime. Every single night, Patricia's father sat on his couch looking out a window just waiting for her to return, but she never did. One of the suspects police looked at was Carey Michael Hilton. The police knew that he was in the area on that day. He once made a statement that his favorite place to go was a hair salon when he was looking for easy targets, referring to women whose life he Jeremy Jones. On the surface, he appeared to be an average guy, but he liked to abuse women and went in their lives afterwards. Jeremy told police that he was driving and he decided to stop at a hair salon. He drew a picture of where his car was parked and where her car was parked and was very accurate. He told investigators that he threw her body in Sweetwater Creek in Douglasville, Georgia. An extensive search was done off the area, but no son of Patrice was found there at all. Soon after, Jeremy Jones of Drury's confession. Jeremy Jones and Carey Michael Hilton are still considered suspects. 20 months after Patrice disappeared, on the December 6, 2005, a man by the name of Albert Clark found a skull. The skull was found near the Lebanon Baptist Church, about 6 miles from Patrice's salon. Authorities quickly confirmed that the skull belonged to Patrice. With this discovery, it became clear that she hadn't run away, someone had taken her life. After learning this, Pistol went to the police, expressing his belief that Rob was responsible. He suspected that Patrice's desire for a divorce had angered Rob. Many of Patrice's friends shared this suspicion, and viewers of the Unsolved Mysteries episode covering her case also speculated about Rob's possible involvement. Rob, however, insisted that his involvement was impossible due to the timeline of events. Investigators acknowledged that while it wasn't entirely impossible, it was highly unlikely. One particularly disturbing detail about Rob was his behavior at the funeral home. He rearranged Patrice's bones to make them resemble a full body. He also openly displayed her ashes and claimed that he slept next to them every night. Despite his unsettling actions, police never found any concrete evidence linking him to her death. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.